Hi everybody, my name is Madeline Tolliver and I'm going to be going over some of the top methods to use when you're wanting to share your assessment results with others. So before you can start looking at the actual method that you want to use, you have to look at a few things. First is understanding your audience. You are going to tailor make your method that you're going to use with your audience. So you've got to ask yourself a couple of questions. Who is your audience? What communication method do they prefer to use? What formats do they need? Are they visual? Do they need graphs and tables? Or are they more into reading things like journal articles? What are their perspectives, their needs, their priorities? What decisions do they have to make? And how much information will they want or actually do they need? Also, you need to make sure you're choosing a method that helps the audience see the big picture. Make sure that everything you include tells an important part of the story. And then you're going to cascade from the major points down to the details. You're going to keep things short with highlighting key results. The shorter communication is the more likelihood that people will actually read, listen, or view. Keep things simple and clear. Avoid jargon. Use numbers sparingly and round numbers to the nearest whole number. Were some of the tips that I found. And then when you're presenting in a variety of ways, because you're looking at the possibility of having to present the materials to more than one audience. So each audience, you're going to have a different method in which to present. Now, the methods of sharing your information can be split into three types. You have written, you have verbal, and you have electronic. So on here we have reports and executive summaries, journal articles, audio and video recordings, slides, posters and banners, online methods, news media, oral presentations and webinars, and infographics, brochures, and handouts. So reports and executive summaries. An executive summary summarizes the project's key services, goals, and accomplishments, along with the information that's needed to understand and assess the project. And executive summaries are primarily used for funders and benefactors, the public, and media and policymakers. Then there are technically three different types of reports. There's a technical report, which tells you specific details about the project evaluation, the methodology, and formal analysis, and a lot of times it will have that statistical analysis in it. Then there's the interim and final project report, which these two kind of go hand in hand because they are given out at specific periods in the project. So the interim reports at specific times, then you have the formal report, the final project report at the end. So when you're looking at creating an executive summary and or a report, make sure you're using plenty of headings and subheadings so that people can go directly to the areas that they need. It was also suggested to use different fonts, use bullets to keep it very simple and concise, and then use simple tables and graphs. The electronics all have these crazy new big elaborate graphs and graphics and tables that you can use, but everything that I read showed that you wanted to make sure to keep it simple, that's easy to read and easy to compile. Next we have the slides, posters, and banners. A lot of times these are used in conjunction with oral presentations or recordings, and they can be used for all audience types. They don't really have a specific. Some tips for using slides, posters, and banners is to keep them simple, uncluttered, and readable. Keep the text to just a few words to emphasize major points, and to use large fonts so that it's easy for everybody to see. Oral presentations and webinars those are what's used in conjunction with the slides, posters, and banners. And these are pretty much used for presenting general summaries of evaluation findings or to convey the lessons learned. So you can use the oral presentation and the webinars for project managers and staff, funders and benefactors, participants or potential participants. And when we're looking in higher ed, what we're kind of looking at is probably talking about the potential students and students. professional colleagues, and then policymakers. Some tips for your presentation: keep your remarks short and informal. Concentrate on the findings. Don't get caught up too much into the details. Just concentrate on the findings. And instead of reading your text, use a bulleted list so that you can keep your place without actually reading off of it. And then, whenever possible, actively involve your audience. If they're more actively involved, the more they'll remember the details. Journal articles is something that we are all familiar with, but they contain information for the larger audience, the larger field of study, and they may be written for the technical audience. So when you're looking at a journal article, you're going to look at the funders and benefactors, the participants or potential participants, professional colleagues, and policymakers. I found a good article from Inside Higher Ed that discussed how to write the journal article and things that you need to make sure that you include in your article, which is the introduction, the theoretical framework, the data and methods, the results, and then the discussion or conclusion. So under online methods, there's a group of them. There's websites, social media, blogs, and newsletters. The good thing about these online methods is that they reach a broad audience. And then with social media, allows for the short and frequent updates like Facebook and Twitter. And then blogs, with their online journals, they can convey the information about projects. And then newsletters can be emailed out to your audience so to keep them up to date on what it is that you're looking at. So they can be used for funders and benefactors, participants or potential participants, public and media, professional colleagues, and policymakers. Infographics, brochures, and handouts are appropriate for all audiences, and they're really good to convey the concise information. They're visually appealing, and they're relatively a brief document. So they can be used to shoot out important tidbits. So for some tips, when you're building out these infographics, the brochure, the handouts, keep the target audience in mind during the creation. Keep it simple, keep it focused. You're showing the things visually, so don't use too many words, and then make it a manageable length and size. So for audio and visual recordings, a good thing about using audio and visual recordings is just like the online methods, they'll reach a broad audience. So with audio recordings, you're going to have the radio and podcasts, and then for video recordings, you're going to have YouTube clips, for an example. And they're really used for the public and the media, and then participants and potential participants. And then for the news media, there's another couple of methods that you can use. There's press releases, interviews with that you take with the news media, and then advertisements. And these, again, they'll reach multiple audiences simultaneously, and they'll again reach a large a broad audience. So they can be used for funders and benefactors, participants or potential participants, public and media, professional colleagues, and policymakers. Here are the resources that I used for my project. I'll tell you that two of the resources that I used that I found to be very helpful were the book Assessing Student Learning, a Common Sense Guide. It had a lot of information about evaluating processes, and then about the methods. And then secondly was the Effectively Communicating Evaluation Findings. That was a really helpful resource because it actually went through and gave you examples of a project and what the best method was that you could use that with. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and I look forward to your comments and questions.